get started. It's 4 o'clock. So I will do roll call. Anderson is out. Bork. Here. Gade. Here, sorry. My brain just. Grimm. Harrelson.
Here.
Krylov.
Here.
Murray.
Here.
Shetty.
Present.
Silman. Smith. And Traer.
Traer, yes, here.
Okay, wonderful. So
For staff, we have Sarah Gardner present, Diane Platt, and Jane Welch.
okay, thank you. And we'll make note that Silman joined the meeting. Approval of minutes that were included in today's packet. Are any corrections needed?
Shetty moves to approve.
Murray, second.
Okay, and then all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, wonderful. Motion passes. And then we'll move to next agenda item, which we have announcements and reports. So action items from the last meeting.
Yes, so this is a correction, actually, to the agenda for today. We carried over the action items from the previous month. It should have noted that we were going to follow up with an email containing updates on any potential conflict of interest in participating in the Bur Oak Shrub Program, whether or not the MPO utilizes travel diaries, and how residents are notified of the utility discount program. Fortunately, even though we got it wrong in the agenda, we got it right in the email that we sent to you, which you would have all received. And just to note, in that email, I noted that it would be included in the agenda packet, and hopefully you saw that it was. Part of the thinking behind that is it occurred to me that these questions come up in the meeting and we follow up with you, but folks who are listening to the recording who might be interested in the information as well would not then have an opportunity to see what the answers were. So just to close the loop and in the interest of full transparency, we'll just make it the practice going forward to include those follow-up emails in the agenda packet for the benefit of others as well. Then in terms of upcoming events, we're in luck. The first item is the Earth Expo, which is put together by our AmeriCorps staff, and we have 2 AmeriCorps representatives here, one or both of whom can pop up and give you a little detail on that event.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tristan Keller. I'm the education coordinator for Green Iowa AmeriCorps, Iowa City. On April 5th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Robert A. Lee Community Recreation Center, we will have Earth Expo. And Earth Expo is a community event that highlights local and also statewide organizations that are committed to environmental work, sustainability, climate action, and conservation as well. During that event, we will also have a sustainable fashion show that is sponsored by the Iowa City Landfill and Recycling Center. And as of right now, we have, I think, over 20 local designers and models, so we're super excited. And we also have some local businesses and consignment shops and thrift stores, such as Crowded Closet and the Savvy Boutique and 10,000 Villages. So if you're free that day, please show up. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Tristan, if anybody is affiliated with the group that would be interested in participating in Earth Expo, is there still room available to do so?
If you let me know by this week, I can make room. But as of right now, we are pretty jam-packed. But just let me know if you are interested.
Awesome, thank you. Then you'll note the other item on the upcoming events is our annual Neighborhood Energy Blitz. The International Earth Day organization reached out to us last week with some questions about this event, so nice to see it get recognized. If you are interested in participating in the event, you can just put a little place marker on your calendar for April 26th, which is when we'll be hosting it. And just as a reminder, we do have morning and afternoon shifts for that event. The morning usually runs somewhere from 9 to 11-ish, and the afternoon usually runs somewhere from 3 to 5. But we'll be sending out more details about that should anyone like to sign up. And I know, Zach, Jack, you've participated in years past. Anything you'd care to add about the event?
Yeah, I really enjoy doing it. It's really cool. I usually go to the morning session, and in the morning you're handing out boxes with energy-saving items in them. It's super easy. You just go around and you just put them on doorsteps and ring the doorbell, and on you go. And then in the afternoon you go back around and collect. People can put in light bulbs to return and have recycled. So highly encourage anybody to get out and get some steps in. It's a good way to walk around.
That's always
Hopefully
a
it
lot
won't
of
be as
fun.
cold and dreary as last year.
Well, we can't make any promises about the
Right.
weather, but I can promise that the vehicle I drive always has a really great soundtrack, so.
I can attest to that, yeah.
Are there any other upcoming events in the community that any of you would like to highlight?
This is Shetty. I just want to mention that the Office of Sustainability at the university has an Earth Month hub that's online. So if anyone has any events that they'd like to add to that, we have the expo on it. If anybody would like to, you can go to sustainability.uiowa.edu, and you'll find the Earth Month hub, and you can submit an event there. And also, I want to share that one of the things that we're planning is the planting of a Miyawaki forest on campus. So this is happening on Arbor Day, which is actually April 25th, a little bit after Earth Day. But we're planting 4,000 trees in 1/2 an acre on campus. So it's super exciting, and it will be a series of days, starting on Arbor Day, over the weekend also, until the 4,000 trees are planted. You'll know much more next month. I can let you know a lot more. We're just starting to plan details out.
So cool. Anybody else with any events?
Could you include in the minutes the Web Hub address?
Yes.
That would be very helpful, I think. Thank you.
Do you have the Web Hub address off the top of your head?
I think it's sustainability.uiowa.edu/earthmonth.
Okay.
Or Earth Month. But it's very prominent.
Prominent. Okay, thank you.
We'll look it up and confirm. All right, and then just a couple other items under events, announcements. In the agenda, we also included a link to the State of the City address that was given 2 weeks ago by Mayor Teague. We included that just because a number of climate action initiatives were highlighted as part of that event. So if anybody has any interest, that recording's available to you to watch. Likewise, the discussion that we hosted on the inclusive transportation with Victoria Davis, we included the link to that as well. That conversation was really fantastic. Angie Smith really did the commission proud in the questions she asked and conducting that conversation. So if anybody didn't have a chance to participate in it live and would be interested to hear the kinds of things that were discussed, that link was available to you as well. And of course, both of those can be found on the city's YouTube channel. And then finally, speaking of Angie Smith, she was unable to be here today, but as you know, she's participating in the steering committee on the comprehensive plan update, and she told me to give you all the update that there is no update. They didn't meet, so hopefully we'll hear more from her next month.
All right, wonderful. Next, we're on to old business and a call for 2 volunteers to serve on the Climate Action Grants Scoring Committee, which I saw just got released today. So.
Yeah, this is super exciting. We have members who have participated in the past and always really enjoy it. What we're asking for is approximately a 1 to 2 hour of your free time to review the applications. And then Danny schedules 2 hours to go over and score them. He says 1 hour is generally not enough. 2 hours is more than they need, but we'll schedule a 2 hour block just to be safe. So you can plan on roughly 90 minutes of conversation about that. Do we have any volunteers? Nadia? Anyone else? Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Nadia, and Brenda will follow up with you about that.
Yeah, I can attest, it's really fun. They do have great snacks. But it's fun to see all of the proposals and just the innovation in the community too. So exciting. New business, we have proposed reusable food container grant.
So this one, we put in here in part because we've got the benefit of Jane being with us today, and also because we're hoping to roll this out alongside the climate action grants this year. Just recognizing that we're getting an increased number of grant proposals that involve reusable food containers. And one of the thoughts behind the climate action grants as a whole was that we would look for these kinds of patterns to determine if we should ever spin off a related grant. There was, just as an example, a few years prior, some discussion about whether it made sense to spin off a separate grant program for solar panels on top of nonprofits. We ended up looking into that and realizing that most of the nonprofits that might be interested in solar panels by dint of owning their own buildings had already passed through the Climate Action Grant Program. So we decided just to maintain it within the Climate Action Grant Program itself. But with the reusable containers, it does seem like there is an opportunity here to set up something standalone. And the advantage of that, as you might have noted in the memo that we put out, was that not just in the climate action grant period, but actually throughout the year, we'll get contacted by businesses or organizations that are interested in some assistance adopting reusable containers. And it always stinks just a little to have to say, yes, of course, you can apply for a climate action grant 9 months from now, and then 3 months after that, you'll be able to make that purchase. Like a lot of times, businesses are working on a shorter time frame. So the intention with this grant pool is that it would be open for people to apply at any point in the year until the grant funds are exhausted. The other impetus behind it, those of you who've been on the commission for a while now might recall that Jane has been diligently working with restaurants and diners in Iowa City to find out what the barriers are to adopting reusable or more sustainable options for to-go containers or foodware in restaurants, partly following when we had to announce that we could no longer take clamshell containers in our recycling program, to just help meet businesses where they are and provide some alternatives. Also noted in the memo, you'll see that one of the things that came out in that is that there was some confusion, understandably, with businesses about what was and wasn't allowable under county code. And so in designing this program, one of the things we put in was a requirement that along with the funding, they would work with Jane to identify what are the opportunities to encourage and empower customers to bring their own containers that could be used for refilling or taking things home, because ultimately that's going to be more sustainable in the long term. Those are sort of the broad strokes of the program. We're initially setting up a pool of funds of $20,000, half of which is coming from the climate action budget, half of which is coming from resource management, with the intention of funding grants up to an amount of $5,000. And as I mentioned, they would be available until the funds are exhausted. And then at the end of this calendar year, we'll see where we're at and try to dial in what that program might look like long-term based on the initial interest we get. Are there any questions about it?
This is Shetty. I was wondering, will this be the same container for all of the restaurants or businesses that participate, or will it be branded or different types because they'll have different foods or drinks or things that they're going?
That's a great question. We will not be providing the containers. Part of our intention is not to get into the restaurant supply business. We will just be providing funding. And we will have an application process where the business will identify the kinds of to-go containers that they would like. If they'd like to brand them, we'll leave that up to them. You know, there are some arguments for branded containers in that it might increase the opportunity for it to be returned to them. But, and if that's how they want to spend their dollars, that's fine. But we won't dictate that they do that one way or the other.
Question. Krylov, I'm just wondering about events that the city itself is involved in, like the farmer's market, that licenses or grants permission and the fairs in the pet zone. There are a lot of containers involved in that. So that would be kind of a different trajectory. Is there anything in the works about that? Or about, an exchange of like, if you, then we?
Yes, we have had ongoing discussions with the farmers market about compostable or reusable containers. There are a number of barriers that were identified with compostable containers in particular. I don't know, Jane, if you want to pop up and speak on this a little as well. We did have one project identified that I think we had a changeover in management, and so we ended up not pursuing. Long story short, the vendors, individual vendors who participate in those events would, of course, be eligible to apply for this funding if they so want to do. But in terms of a larger coordinated effort with the farmers market, I don't think we at this time have anything solid in the works.
Don't, but it is definitely an ongoing discussion. And as Sarah said, there's been a few barriers. We've had a little bit of staff changeover. There was also a pretty heavy conversation of this going on, and then the pandemic hit. So there were definitely some barriers that came about just from a public health standpoint. We have on a few different attempts, tried composting at the farmers market. And there's definitely a contamination issue, and we need the bin to be staffed, and we just cannot always get the staff needed to ensure the contamination is staying as low as we need it to be. So please know this is an ongoing conversation, but one area that we did find some headway and some solutions for is this grant program. So this is kind of one of the first steps we're taking in the reusable realm.
I can attest as a former volunteer for some of those initial composting efforts at the farmers market. People do not like to be stopped on their way out of the market and asked to sort their trash. We'll just leave it at that.
So this is different, Krylov again. This is, compostable containers are different from reusable containers.
Correct.
So just in terms of the might of government in granting or not granting permission, that isn't there some kind of leverage that says if you use reusable containers, you get a discount on something, or this is the condition of getting a license?
The difficulty, and here I may need to lean on Jane again, we did look at the possibility of reusable containers, and the hurdles were pretty high, to be honest. One of the biggest ones was the ability to set up washing stations at the farmers market or events to have things cleaned. And the program we had talked about earlier that we had explored was maybe having one day where we would bring in reusable or durable foodware and set up a washing station ourselves to try it out. Jane, can you help me remember what all the barriers were? Because I know it's been a while now since we've had that discussion. I remember there was questions about how many of the materials actually would be returned for reuse. There were questions about health code regulations about passing the container, like the vendors themselves could not accept the container to fill. They could only pass it forward. And then there's a question of getting it back to do again in a clean state. It was just more complicated than it would seem at first blush.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers was we need a commercial kitchen to be able to wash, and this is an event. This isn't a brick and mortar location where we have those facilities already in place. So I think that was one of the biggest issues. And again, I think another one was just some staff turnover where we may have had some buy-in, and as staff turnover, sometimes the project just has to start over. So Again, I think there's still potentially some solutions that we're exploring within that, but really the area that we were moving forward with, where we saw some solutions, was looking at existing restaurants that do already have those commercial kitchens and potentially could handle those materials in-house. Yeah.
Not that I want to drag this out, but I was kind of thinking of the cups that the Hansher
Sure.
sells, and then you take them home. You don't really turn them in. There's something that you can use there ongoingly. And I would love to get a bento box from somebody, to be able to take home. In any case, like I said, I don't want to keep this going, but that's a slightly different thing than having to turn it back or compost it, but something good enough to take home.
Sure. Yeah, and one other thing I'll mention too, related to this grant, so it's takeout containers. It could be, right? There's a lot of different scenarios that make this grant very flexible depending on who the restaurant or food vendor is. But there's also some opportunities for materials that are just used in-house that right now might be disposable or even compostable. And we're looking at restaurants or entities that serve food. It could be theaters, for example, and where they may currently be using a disposable cup or a disposable popcorn container, and where there may be some opportunities for those materials that don't ever leave the premises to go reusable. So definitely some new areas that we're exploring there, and some new opportunities with this grant program.
Part of the challenge too with reusable takeout containers that are commemorative or that you just keep is the benefit is really in the reuse, and there's a limit to how many bento boxes any one person needs, for example.
That's true.
Yeah, it's sort of the reusable tote bag dilemma, right? Like those tote bags make sense from a greenhouse gas reduction standpoint if you use them time after time, year after year, right? And so just trying to find that balance can be tricky, but it is something that we have ongoing conversations about, and actually are excited for all those conversations, are excited at long last to have some small pathway forward. So thank you, though, for the insights and the comments. That's all very helpful, and the keen questions. It always helps us think through things that maybe we haven't explored yet.
Yeah, and just to say too, we recognize that there are areas that absolutely need improvement and growth, and we're continuing to try to work through those barriers. So again, we haven't come up with a perfect solution for example, event style, but we're definitely still looking at those solutions and trying to come up with something there.
Are there any other questions about the proposed grant?
All right, seeing none, we'll move on to resource management update and discussion of environmental management system objectives and targets with Jane Welch.
Thanks, Jamie. Now, Sarah, does everyone see on their screen what I see?
They do, and we can project it too. Would you prefer projected to what's on the screen in front of you? All right. All right, Diane, just for you.
Okay, while we're getting that going, I can start with at least the compost facility update. So we are in the early stages of expanding our compost facility, which is located at the Iowa City landfill. It has been at capacity for many years, so we really have not been able to grow programming to be able to accept more incoming material because of that at capacity status. So this expansion is through the assistance of 2 grant programs. So the first one being a $100,000 grant that we've received from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources Environmental Management System program, which we'll talk a lot more about in just a moment here. The second one being a $4 million grant, which is through the Environmental Protection Agency's SWIFR program, which is the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Grant Program. A note on this funding is at the moment paused by the federal government, but we are still optimistically moving forward with the program. So the goal of this project is to increase the capacity of the facility of how much incoming organic material, so that's yard waste and food waste, we are able to accept. So the current limit is at 15,000 tons per year. We're hoping to expand to at least 20,000 tons per year. And we're doing that through a few different things. We're going to be physically expanding the facility, so constructing 2 additional acres to the current 5, so it will eventually be a 7-acre facility. We're also looking at resurfacing and repairing the current compost processing pad that just has had a lot of wear and tear over the years and could use some repair. And then the third big action is going to be a purchase of a ride-over windrow turner, which basically goes over the rows of compost and turns it as it goes. And that's going to help with increasing just the efficiency of how we process that material. So where we are at currently, right now, we are in the design stage of the facility with the assistance of Shive Hattery and SES engineers. We are also doing quite a bit of research and visits to other facilities to look at different models that exist for windrow turners. And then finally, if funding does continue as planned, facility construction will begin later this year, estimating around fall. So I'll pause before I get into the wide world of EMS to see if there are any questions about the compost facility expansion.
This is Grim. You said the capacity was like 15,000 tons.
Yeah.
How long does it take to get to that 15,000 tons? Like, or is that just the max that complete capacity through the entire year?
So it's really throughout the entire year, and it represents what current programming we do, and essentially the fact that we can't expand programming. So right now, we really can't go out to restaurants or commercial or industrial entities because we know we're at that cap right now. So really that represents the different programs that we have throughout the entire year. So that's our curbside composting program, and especially that's a few food waste haulers locally in the area.
So what will this new capacity be then after the expansion?
So the goal is at least 20,000 tons, and with that added incoming material that we could be bringing in, really starting some additional outreach to customers that don't have curbside composting or commercial industrial entities that might be producing food waste that we just can't tap into right now. Great. Any other questions?
This is Silman. So the turners that you were talking about that go down the rows, is that something new, or is that something that you've been using but you're just getting some more of them?
That's a great question. So they've been around for a while. We don't have one currently. What we're currently doing is using a loader bucket to, in a very manual way, turn the compost, which can take several days. And with this turner, we'll be able to hopefully get through all the windrows in one day. So really increasing efficiency. Currently, we only turn the piles once per month, which is what we're permitted to do. And again, just because of the process taking quite a long time with our current methods. So with the new turner increasing that efficiency, we'll hopefully be able to turn those piles a few times a month, which actually will speed up that decomposition and move that material through quicker.
From my ignorance, may I ask,
Yeah.
does anyone in the county compost the hospital system? That's huge here in the city.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's university related, I don't know, but I know the food there is voluminous, and I'm assuming the waste also is
Yeah.
voluminous.
I'm going to let Brenda start with this
Yeah,
one.
The university does have a contractor that picks up compost waste at the university hospital
At
systems.
the hospital?
Mhm.
Where does
It's
it go?
Waste management. I believe is it Davenport? That
I would have
it's
to
waste
confirm that.
management, yeah.
If it's waste management, I don't think they're currently coming to our facility.
Yeah, I think they go to Davenport.
And does the university have a different system?
Well, we have third-party contractors, so we use waste management.
So Brenda, is the material that is currently being collected in the dining halls, is that also waste management?
It is.
So they actually are coming to our facility then?
Okay.
Okay, yep, if it's consistent with what's happening at the dining halls, they are coming. So the dining halls use pulpers that basically squeeze the water out of the food waste, and then that pulp ends up coming to our facility as well.
I had no idea but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
But you can't encourage greater participation in the system because of the restrictions you now have.
Absolutely.
What percentage of the total is coming from this massive university hospital complex? Any idea?
I wouldn't know, I'd have to look into the data a little bit more on that, yeah.
Beth McKenzie, my colleague, is the waste expert at the university, so she has a lot more answers than I do on waste.
I can tell you of all the material at the compost facility right now, about 10% is food waste. So the majority coming to our facility is yard waste, so leaves, grass, branches, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons within our EPA grant that we wrote, we know that going out and doing programming, the vast majority of the materials we would be receiving as part of that increase would be food waste, because we know that the majority of yard waste is already coming through that facility, just through doing waste sorts of the Iowa City landfill as well, knowing that very little yard waste goes into the landfill and a lot of food waste goes into the landfill. So we know within that expansion, the majority of the material would be food waste.
Question, Krylov. Does someone buy it? The compost, the completed compost, there's a market for it?
Yeah,
Does it
absolutely.
partially fund
The program.
the program?
A little bit. This program, I would argue right now, is partially subsidized. So one of the goals over the next several years is to be able to make it more supporting itself. But currently our compost is available for sale, so it's $20 a ton, and we have residential use of that product. We also have landscape companies, contractors, et cetera.
One other question, what about the VA hospital?
I don't think they are currently composting.
At all?
Not to my knowledge. Brenda? No?
The eyes begin to gleam.
Oh, no, I mean, but that's a huge facility.
This is a job for Mr.
Lots, I
Troyer.
assume lots of food waste.
This is Harrelson. You you mentioned the windrow turner will increase how quickly the material moves through. Is that what the capacity increase is coming from, or are you also expanding the footprint of?
Both. So we
Okay.
are expanding the footprint by 2 additional acres as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, currently we cure our compost for a year, and with the windrow turners, we're anticipating curing it in a 6-month period. Is that right?
So the entire process right now, from start to finish, takes about a year. When the compost is at an almost finished stage, we let it sit to cure for about a month, so that brings it back to an ambient temperature. But with the new processing, with the new turner, the goal is to shorten that time. I'm gonna guess somewhere between 6 to 8 months, but really we're not gonna fully know until we get the process going.
So it'll significantly speed it up. Out of curiosity, how many of you have been out to the landfill or to see the compost operations or take a tour of that? Is there any interest in doing so? Yeah. It is very interesting. Jane has a very long thermometer that she sticks into it as part of the demonstration. We coordinate tours with Jane pretty regularly. If you'd like, I can send updates. I think we may even have one coming up with the new batch of climate ambassadors. Is that right?
We have an Eastside Recycling Center tour coming up. But if there was interest from the commission, we can certainly set up a tour.
Yeah. We'll follow up with Jane on that.
Ready for EMS, Sarah? Any other questions? Okay. All right, so now delving into our environmental management system process through the Iowa DNR. So the city of Iowa City owns and operates the Iowa City landfill, and every landfill in the state of Iowa is required to participate in comprehensive planning. One option for comprehensive planning is opting into what's called the Environmental Management System Program, which again is operated through the Iowa DNR, so for short, EMS. Our EMS is managed by a core team of 6 employees within our resource management division. So each year, we are required to set goals and complete projects within 6 key areas. And the goal of EMS that we hear throughout the year from the Iowa DNR and through other participants is the goal is to always be achieving continuous environmental improvement. So when we go through our annual reporting, when we go through our auditing, that's really always is the question, do you have continuous environmental improvement? So those 6 key areas that we are planning goals and projects within are currently hazardous material management, organics management, water quality improvement, greenhouse gas reduction, recycling services, and environmental education. So each goal is called an objective and target. I will warn there is a lot of terminology within the EMS program, but each goal is called an objective and target, and we have the objectives and targets organized into a spreadsheet format, similar to what is in front of you right now. And this includes actions, deadlines, measures for that continuous environmental improvement. Each objective and target can have different lengths. So sometimes we have projects that are maybe just 1 year, sometimes they're multi-year, sometimes they're active ongoing. So it really can vary depending on what the project is. So just a brief overview of this year's objectives and targets to give you an idea of what we're working on, and then we'll delve into one example in particular. So our hazardous material objective and target is to increase safe and proper sharps and syringes containment. So this is related to anyone that has medical sharps or syringes, making sure that when after they're used, or even for ones that are unused, making sure they're ending up in either medical sharps containers or a rigid plastic or metal container. This is for human safety. This is also for environmental safety. Our organics management objective and target, as you can imagine, that is our compost facility expansion project. So this is an example of an objective and target that is a multi-year, really for the next 5 years, we're going to be working on that objective and target. Our water quality objective is to spread thin layers of leaves onto landfill property to increase nutrients in the soil and overall soil health. Our greenhouse gas objective is to reduce transportation emissions related to maintaining cardboard recycling at the Sturgis Ferry Recycling Center. And this is through the installation of a cardboard compactor. Our recycling services objective is to increase the diversion of roof shingles into our roof shingles recycling program, and that's the one we'll talk about a little bit more here. And then finally, our environmental education objective is to increase awareness and education on the proper disposal of electric bike batteries and electric scooters. Just seeing a high concentration of both of those right now. We've seen it with wind turbines and solar panels and a lot of new technologies over the years where eventually you're looking at disposal. Disposal is happening much faster for these 2 categories, and so really trying to figure out what are the proper disposal options for these 2 items. Okay, so looking at the recycling services objective and target a little bit more closely to explain the format. So that is in front of you on the screens here. And I'll kind of move us through here with the cursor. So again, one of the reasons we're looking at this is to determine if there's potentially any overlap with climate action goals. And so keep in mind that some of these categories may be very EMS specific, but definitely adaptive. So EMS participant name, Iowa City Landfill. Moving from top to bottom, the common name, so every objective and target that we have, which is essentially in the spreadsheet, is its own tab, has its own name. So this one is called the Roof Shingles Recycling Program. Moving down to the objective description, so both for the objective and the target, we split it between action and subject boxes. So the objective description is to decrease the landfilling of roof shingles. I'm going to come back to aspect in just a moment here. The adoption date is whenever you start the objective and target. Target description, so action and subject is to increase tonnage of roof shingles recycled by 10% of fiscal year 2024 baseline. And then we have our data down here under the results and baseline that show what is that baseline. So how many tons of roof shingles did we collect through the roof shingles recycling program in fiscal year 24? That was 335. So that is how we get to this quantity two of saying, okay, we want that 10% increase. So we want to get to at least 368 tons. Metric, of course, that's tons. Time period, so how the DNR currently uses this box is based off of when you're actually actively collecting the data. So in this example, that 10% increase, we're going to compare FY24 to FY26. We'll have a results category in FY25, but that's really not going to be that final comparison to see if we did achieve that 10%. FY25 in this objective and target is really us building that program out, getting everything in place that we need, the communications with the contractors and the roofing companies to start being able to see that result, especially in FY26. Time period, so this says annual. Again, something specific to the EMS program. Annual can be a 1 to 2 year objective. Component, as we talked about, this is our recycling services component area. We've got our results category. So again, this is adaptive to whatever the project is. With this particular project, we've got 3 fiscal years we're covering. If we're looking at, for example, our compost facility expansion, that's going to have more results categories because that's a multi-year one. And then finally down here are action plan items. So I only included one just to show the example of how we start an action plan where you've got the task description, you've got the time period that you're working on it, which I will say changes. You know, it depends how this project is going. There's different things that come up that might move a task forward or backward. So this definitely moves around. Responsibility, so with this particular task item, I'm responsible. And then if there are any key resources and any notes. So this section, again, you can have as many action items as you need to. With this particular objective, we probably have 5 or 6. If we're looking at the compost facility expansion one, that could be upwards of 15 to 20 just because that's a much larger project. Okay, so going back to that aspects category, so again, this is really kind of showing the road to how we got to this objective and target. So aspects and impacts, we have this labeled as just aspect, but this is coming from a list that we call aspects and impacts. This is a list of topics that directly affect or represent our service area. So one example, as we can see here, acceptance and management of special recyclables. A few other examples of some topics that would be listed would be management of surface and stormwater at the landfill. It could be curbside collection of composting. It could be equipment and vehicle operation at curbside collections. It could be acceptance and management of recyclables at Eastside Recycling Center. So as you can see, these are a lot of different topics that hit within those component areas. So it hits within greenhouse gas emissions or organics management or water quality. So every spring, the core team rescores our list of aspects and impacts to see what is a priority or where programming might be needed. And these scores are really what help to guide the future drafting and development of the next fiscal year's objectives and targets. So we don't just come up with these projects. These are really scoring processes and many discussions within the core team of what's currently going on at the landfill, what's currently going on within our fence line, which includes curbside collections and recycling drop-off centers, and where is their focus needed? What programs do we need? So an example, this is one that we actually did previously have during our scoring, being able to look at the recycling services and seeing the aspect for acceptance and management of recyclables at Eastside Recycling Center. Well, at that time, we were having a lot of contamination issues in the plastics recycling at Eastside. So naturally, that could be an item that scores high when we're doing the aspects and impact scoring. And then from there, we sit down and we say, all right, what scored high within this component category? We talk about it and we decide where do we need to form a project. So that's really where all of these objectives and targets come from, are that scoring process and then having several discussions within that core team of what to prioritize. So one of the great things about EMS is that there really are a lot of check-ins. And again, that's all about that continuous environmental improvement. So it's between our aspects and impact scoring that we do. It's with our objectives and targets planning that we do. We have an annual report that is due every single year where we have to look back at the previous year and see how things went or where maybe there's still improvement needed in some of those areas. We also have 2 audits that we do per year. One is internal, and your internal auditor is sitting right before us here, Sarah Gardner. She's been extremely helpful for the program to really look at it through a new lens and perspective. She just started, I think, 2 years ago, so has been a big help, Sarah. So she's our internal auditor, and then we also have an external audit with the Iowa DNR as well. So really, this is just continuous environmental improvement to keep us moving in the right direction. I'll pause now, see what questions we have. Again, I think this is something that Sarah and I were talking about for if there's other applications for this type of format and structure for a program.
So I imagine questions can go in one of 2 directions. One is about the roof shingle recycling program itself, and the other is about the EMS process, which, as you know, we're bringing forward because it dovetails with some of the conversations we've had about metrics, and we see this as a way of potentially setting some metrics for our programs. So why don't we start first and just see if there are any questions about the roof shingles recycling specifically, and then we can ask EMS-related questions. Does that sound about right? Maybe there are no questions about roof shingle recycling.
I'll also say, so I'm just using this one as an example, but really every objective and target format looks the exact same. It would just be filled in with the different aspects of whatever project it is.
Do you have an example of the recyclable product that comes at the end of this process for shingles?
Not with me today, but yes, we do work with LL Pelling for this project.
A what?
We work with a company called LL Pelling. So what they do is they use the product in road surfacing. Yeah.
This is Selman. How are you currently collecting the roof shingles?
So we've got a location at the Iowa City landfill where we collect them, and that's really where most of the loads from contractors are coming in anyway. So that's what we're trying to target, is looking at where roof shingles are coming from. If they're coming in loads of garbage, for example, trying to create some of that diversion so we have those clean loads of shingles coming out. And they're coming to the landfill anyway, so it's a good location for where we have that program. Residents can also participate in the program if they happen to have roof shingles, but the majority of customers that we see are the roofing companies or contractors. Yeah.
This is Bork. So you've noticed a high concentration of roof shingles coming to the landfill compared to like other waste items, and that's why this is one of the examples. Is that correct?
That's a great question. So construction and demolition waste has been a big focus. We've been looking at different areas where we can start to take bites out. And this is one of those areas of construction and demolition that we do have a diversion method for. We've got a company that's able to reuse that material. Unfortunately, within the construction and demolition world, there's a lot of materials that don't currently have diversion options for them. This is a very solid material, so when you landfill roof shingles, there's really not a lot of compaction that can happen. It takes up the space that it takes up, so it is taking up a lot of landfill space. So the reason we're focusing on this is just that we do have a current diversion solution for it, so let's continue to expand that.
And just as a note, Jane and I and a couple other staff members traveled to Chicago last year to see a more mature construction and demolition recycling operation, to see if first, if we could benchmark anything that we might be able to bring back here, and also if there was possibly a market there or a collaboration where we could send some material. It was an interesting day.
It was an interesting day.
Yeah, Chicago, a lot of demolition material, little overwhelming in some ways.
Yeah, and you know, the reason it's located in Chicago is exactly what Sarah just said. There's a lot of demolition and construction that's happening there. And so the company developed a market where, you know, they had enough material stream coming in that they said, let's build a facility.
We do think there may be some possibility on the horizon. We're probably not ready to provide a lot of details about it, but we do think there might be a second stream that we might be able to work on later. That's wonderfully vague, but there you go.
Do you want to mention it? I'm trying to think what you're talking about right now. Oh, I do know.
Oh, good. I didn't dream it up.
Mattresses?
Well, not just, yes, we do have the mattresses, but also Jen Jordan had been talking about a vague possibility for lumber recycling.
Oh, sure, yes. Very, very initial stages of that. But specifically when we say lumber, treated lumber, which is a really big deal because it's something that we can't currently accept through the compost facility because of its treatment. So coming up with some sort of diversion method for that would be really exciting. So again, very initial stages of that, but hopeful.
Mostly, and I'm noting it just to say, we're always looking out for these possibilities and thinking about what else might be out there that we could be doing.
Since I mentioned it, we are working on some mattress recycling expansions as well, so more to come on that horizon.
This is Harrelson. This is kind of maybe a little bit of a sidetrack, but how then do we pull that into sort of climate planning and regional climate planning with Cedar Rapids or just the region at large going forward in the next couple of years?
The construction and demolition or the EMS process?
I was thinking more the construction and demolition, yeah.
That's a great question. I think construction and demolition is one of those conversations, along with composting, that is definitely a regional discussion. So I will say, I think some of our local partners, other landfills within our region, are very interested in that discussion. And just as, we talked about too with Chicago, where they have enough material to have a facility, I think it'd be a similar case here. Where, in some cases you need to combine materials to justify the market. So I think some of those conversations are happening. Again, another big area that they're happening around is composting as well. Yeah.
Is your landfill and composting facility the only available option in Johnson County?
Within Johnson County, we are the only commercial compost facility, yes.
And landfill?
Yes. Yep. Yes, so currently both of them serve all of Johnson County and then also the municipalities of Kelowna and Riverside.
Question, Mrs. Krylov. I'm kind of a little bit stuck with this whole idea of federal money. And I just wondered if there is some kind of a calculation at this point, just what that impact is on climate action right now. Any kind of estimate about what the impact on these two programs, for example, is?
It's hard to know yet because currently it's just paused. So we've not lost the funding. And like I said, definitely moving forward optimistically with that program. I will say, without fully knowing what the status is of that funding, we are certainly coming up with what Plan B or Plan C could be to still be able to manage some sort of expansion. But I think it's difficult to estimate right now just with it not being necessarily a permanent status yet. Sarah, anything further?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have a solid number anytime soon. I think there's just a lot of chaos in terms of what's going on with that funding, what is frozen and unfrozen and then refrozen. There are organizations out there that are trying to track the impact, and certainly we're in communication with them, and also keeping our own eyes out for our own programs, but I think it will be a while before we really know. And part of that just has to do with the legal processes, right? Like, some of it will be impacted by lawsuits that are brought to halt the halting of the funding, and whether or not they succeed will determine what the ultimate impact is. But I would say it is a non-zero number. and can go into more detail depending on how much crying you want to see us do.
Yeah, I'm just also wondering where the state stands on this. You know, is this state pushing back against the freeze, or just kind of, there's an environment, you know, where we exist in kind of a general environment of how to deal with that. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, we can't speak for the state. Yeah, we can't speak for the state. But I would also just, I do this myself a lot, encourage myself to remember, like, just like local government, the state government's not monolithic either, right? The state itself the response may vary based on agency. It may vary based on whether something is being pushed back on by the state government versus a state organization, right? So I think there are a lot of dynamics at play. But on the whole, if the question is about state government for Iowa, I don't think there's a lot of, I don't know. I can't speak for it. It varies agency by agency. I think that's fair to say. Is that what you're seeing, Jamie, as well?
Yeah, certainly. It's tough to weave through everything.
Partly it depends on how much individual agencies, how much stake they have in the funding. Partly it depends on how empowered those individual agencies may be to push back on it. Because, of course, there's the political environment of the state as well that
Right.
impacts that.
If this is optimistic at all, we still have our $100,000 from the DNR, so that's very exciting, going towards the Turner.
Good.
Would we like to shift gears and talk a little about the EMS process? All right, I'll give you a little overview of where I see this going, and that may help inform some questions we might ask for Jane. What I would like us to explore is going through the different sections of the Climate Action Plan and seeing if we can, as a test case, identify one objective for each section that we can then attach a target to and use this kind of system to set that target and track it. I don't know that our spreadsheet needs to be quite as detailed as the one Jane has presented here, partly because we don't have to answer to the DNR on this. We get to answer to ourselves, so we can take the parts that we think are useful and we can leave out the parts that we think are not. But at the very least, I could see us using the action and subject formatting, the adoption date, the quantities and metrics, and then breaking out a little action plan. And what I would really like to do is think together on this, have you all suggest what we might look at in terms of or objectives that we could track, and then give staff a little opportunity to see, do we have a baseline we can measure against? And if not, is there something else we can use that might make it work? And then settle on one that we're going to try to track. And we'll probably try to track it by the fiscal year rather than the calendar year, just based on when we can get everything in place. And the idea is that next month we would start by doing a review of where we're at with buildings, and then see if we can brainstorm together what our objectives and targets, or O's and T's, as Jane likes to say, might be for that. Yeah, so I'll pause there and see, based on that, are there questions we can answer? I know this is all a little complicated, but I think we're up for the task.
So the action is to kind of look through the buildings section specifically to try and see, like, where do we see one that this kind of framework would be useful for?
Yes, very well put. Much less rambly than me.
No, I was just
Yeah.
trying to make sure I got it.
Yeah, so we'll bring it in, and part of that, I think, we'll also be looking at just prioritization. So a little thinking like, what are our top priorities? Because I think that should also determine what we might attach an objective to, right? If it's a low priority, probably we it doesn't make sense to invest the calories in tracking it to the same degree. But just as an example, and I don't think we should use this, so I'll toss it out. Like if we said we want to set a metric to our insulation grant program, right? We could say we want to increase participation in the insulation grant program by a certain percentage, or we want to increase the total amount of insulation material. Please, let's not do that for sure, because it'd be very hard to measure. But that's the kind of conversation we can have, right? Like, what are we doing? Is it measurable? Could we make it measurable? What makes sense to, as a test case, try? And we'll go from there. And we'll, after we do the buildings category, then we'll look at transportation. We'll leave waste aside because clearly Jane and her colleagues have that very well covered for us. Although we can certainly request updates on their O's and T's in progress if we'd like. I happen to know the internal auditor, so those numbers are real easy to get. And then we'll think a little about what we want to do for sustainable lifestyle. I think that one potentially we could have an O&T with, but I think we want to take a closer look at it together to decide if it makes sense to do that or to circle back to maybe having more than one in buildings and transportation, given that that's where our real GHG reductions are. Cool. Any other questions?
Sort of a conceptual question, but would you frame this in terms of what you're already measuring? Or would you frame it in terms of categories where you may not be measuring, but where you think you should be measuring? It seems in one sense it would be simpler to start where you're already measuring.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume there are numbers, a vast number of places in the system where you're already measuring. But there may be concepts and other goals that we're not measuring adequately now.
I think it could be either, realistically, and I think in the conversation we may reveal or surface what isn't being measured but could be. I think that's probably the bigger litmus. You know, there are some things we're not measuring just because we haven't had an opportunity to measure them, or maybe they're being measured by someone else and we can pull that measure in. There are some things we're not measuring because it would be extremely difficult to do so. The example being, it would be relatively easy for us to measure the number of households participating in the insulation grant program. If we wanted to measure by volume the amount of insulation that's being installed under that program, much more difficult to measure because we have to gather that on a case-by-case basis from the contractors doing the work, and they may themselves not be entirely measuring it. So I think it's worth thinking about it broad-mindedly. And this is one of the things staff can do. If we're not measuring it, we can go back and see what's possible. You weren't here for previous conversations, Robert, but as an example, when we had been discussing possible metrics prior to now, one idea that had come up was maybe trying to measure the total square footage of pavement in the city per capita. And so we did an initial investigation. That is not something we currently measure. And so we went to say, well, would it be possible even to measure this? And what we found out in talking to our engineering and planning colleagues is we could come up with an estimate. We wouldn't have an exact measure of it. And then as things got built out, we could also get an estimate of how much pavement was being laid by that. And then you would be measuring an estimated percentage of an estimate, at which point we thought this is probably not a very solid number, and it's probably not very actionable because of that, the vagueness in it, in which case it's worth going back to what the objective was behind measuring it, right, to reduce pavement overall on future projects and see, is there a better way of achieving that than attaching that particular number to it? And to me, that is the value of going through a process like this, is the opportunity to say, what can we measure And if it's difficult to measure, what are we trying to achieve in it, and is there another way of getting to that? Because ultimately, right, the measurement itself isn't the point. The point is making progress on our climate action goals in a way that we know we can stand behind and demonstrate.
So this is Zillman. So are we going to kind of start with those outcomes then and work back, or?
Sure. I think that's generally the process. You set the objective, the outcome you want, and then you work back to something you can measure. Is that accurate, Jane?
Yeah, I will say the EMS program has really, I mean this in a positive way, it's challenged us to come up with measurements. There's just some projects that we think up and we say, I'm not quite sure how to measure this, and so you really need to look at the project dynamically. Sometimes we reach out to Iowa DNR staff to say, hey, can you brainstorm with us on this? Because again, that goal of continuous environmental improvement, having something that really shows how did you get from point A to point B. So I will say this structure has really helped us to come up with measurement where we didn't have measurement before.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you change your measurements in some categories from year to year, right? You
Absolutely.
say, we measured this 1 year, we were able to see some progress in it, and so now we're going to set another measurement to look at?
Yes, oftentimes the metrics and the measurements change per year.
So that may be a discussion for a future commission, like, do we want to continue year after year measuring these things? Or do we feel like the act of setting this measurement gets the ball rolling, and now we want to shift to this other area so that we're achieving the overall goal of the EMS process, which is continual improvement? I don't know why I'm using so many hand gestures. Like, any other questions?
Very challenging.
Just to clarify, Krylov, is it that you want to keep in mind the areas that make the biggest difference to mitigating climate change? Some of them are outside of the scope of Iowa City. So as I recall, I don't have the whole plan in front of me, but the biggest percentages are transportation, industry, and agriculture, as I recall, in terms of percentages of what contributes to negative, to climate destruction. So then, are there things that are not in the purview of this? Like, are the measures that you're looking for asking, are we doing that which makes the biggest difference in mitigating climate, or are we doing that which is the most easily measurable within our scope, and we accept that? It's just like, what's the background, what's the context?
So the biggest context would be, I do think these measures should be tied to the climate action plan. So we should be looking at the action items within the plan and seeing if we can pick some to attach a measure to. Beyond that, I think this is one of the reasons we're bringing it to the commission to help think about, do we measure the thing that's easy to measure? Do we measure the thing that has the biggest impact, even if the number's not as concrete? And part of that, I think, will become more clear as we take a look at the action items themselves and navigate through where we think the best measurement might be. Jane, can you speak to how you determine your objectives from year to year, what that process looks like for you and your staff?
Yeah, and I'll also say, as Sarah said, this is how EMS operates in terms of what our structure is. There may be just pieces of this that become applicable to climate action, and if that's helpful, great. But just maybe as an example, so, our component areas are hazardous material and organics management. Maybe how that would translate to climate action is a component would be building efficiency. And then within that, you form an objective under that component of building efficiency. And maybe it's, and I'm going to use your example that you don't want me to use, increase insulation within local businesses, we'll say. And then that's a pretty big objective. So that's where we break it down into action items of how are we going to achieve that objective. So I think one goal, one benefit of EMS is that it takes some pretty big ideas and it makes it so it breaks it down into an organized structure of action items, who the key resources are, who's going to be involved per action item, because oftentimes there's some really big action items that just need to be broken down. If we look at our process, so it's about every April or May, so almost near the end of the fiscal year for us. The city fiscal year, as we know, runs July 1st through June 30th, and that's also how the EMS program operates as well through the Iowa DNR. So it's usually around April or May where we start to do that aspects and impact scoring. So again, we look at this huge list of these different topics. It could be curbside composting, right? And the three, I'm glad I printed this off, the 3 areas that we're scoring. So if I'm looking, for example, at curbside collection of composting, I'm going to score that based off of control. So that's the first measure. How much control do I have? So how we score is within a 1, 3, and 5 system. So control 1 would be I don't have any control, or I've got very little control. The second measurement is impact on environment. 1 is no impact or low impact. 5 is high impact. And then the third one is financial impact. So will it cost us or will it save us money? So 1 is a cost, 5 is a profit. So if I'm looking at something like curbside collection of yard waste and organics, we've got pretty high control over that program because we manage that program, right? So I'd probably give control a 3 or a 5. In terms of impact on environment, I'm the recycling coordinator, so I'm going to give that a 5. In terms of financial impact, I'm going to say right now we're probably a 3 or a 5, meaning either no cost or profit, just with how we've structured that program. So we add all those numbers up. And then what we do, so I'm just one person that does the scoring. We've got 5 other people on the core team that do their own set of scoring. And it's really awesome because we all are coming from different perspectives. We've got, landfill operators and staff from our curbside collections, and we've got our superintendent on the core team. So we all have different perspectives that we're coming from. And the scores might look a little bit different, but what we do is we calculate all of them together and do an average. And then we really figure out of all these different components, so you can kind of see I've got all these different colors. Those are really the different component areas. So this is just organics that we're scoring. This is just household hazardous material. And then we figure out what some of the highest scoring items are. And if curbside composting was a really high score out of that, we sit down as a core team and we say, why did it score high? What's going on right now in the program? Are there contamination issues? Is there a lack of participation, or what's going on as to why it scored high? And then we determine from that what kind of program we could shape.
So, and I want to say we've dedicated at least 2 months to work through the first one, so we've got time to feel our way through. One way we could move forward is that next month, when we're thinking through the buildings update, what we've done so far, what might be done, we could identify potential measures or potential action items that we'd like to use, and then staff could score them based on the criteria that Jane presented and bring those scores back for a follow-up meeting, and then we could zero in on the objective and target we want to set from there. And if that process works great, then we duplicate it for transportation. And if it doesn't work, we can try something else. I will say it is entirely possible this whole thing's a giant boondoggle. It would not be the last time or the first time that I've had a bad idea, but we're excited to at least try it.
So this is what I heard, is that even if food waste in the big picture, maybe 2%, it's something doable and countable at the city level.
It could,
So-
yeah.
So kind of a realistic, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that would be an example of a realistic thing that could be measured and acted upon. And I will, am I not, is that,
I think,
Track with you,
and I
Jane?
think Sarah, I mean, with whatever structure that she and the team decides to go with, I think they're looking at the items that are high emitters and low emitters. I think, you know, the goal is to look at the full puzzle of what's causing greenhouse gas emissions and not necessarily just what's easily measurable. I think it's also challenging ourselves to look for a measurement with some of those items that may be emitting a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, but we're just still working on what the perfect measurement would be. Is that fair, Sarah?
Doable
yeah.
It's doable.
thing, yeah.
It's multi-factor
Yep,
too,
yep.
which is where the scoring comes in. I'll also say the other thing we could consider is it could be that when we look over the plan next month or look over the building section, we say, we seem to be having a lot of traction in these areas. There's this one area where we really haven't done much at all. Maybe we'd like to set a measure there as a way of trying to help it move forward. And then we can score it and see how realistic that might be, you know, and then consider it from there. Yeah. If nothing else, I think it will yield some very interesting conversations. And some complicated spreadsheets, and who doesn't like that?
I'll say too, within this EMS program, as you can see with us starting with the aspects and impacts spreadsheet, so we're looking at what the top priorities are. The first thing that we look at with this is not, is it measurable? That's actually one of the last things, which I think is great because it doesn't necessarily influence looking at really what are the sincere priorities we need to be looking at. You determine, hey, this is a priority, and then you say, let's figure out how we can measure it because we know it's a priority.
Hopefully, as we move through the process, it'll feel a little less abstract than it does at this moment.
And if there are further questions, or if we think that there's any sort of adaptation of this model that you want to use, I'm happy to be part of those discussions as well.
I think this is a really interesting way to approach it because it gives us sort of a systematic process to look at something that is can be daunting when you're looking at this huge spreadsheet. So I think going through this will be informative for all of us to kind of break it down.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Exciting. We've got some homework, it sounds like, to review the building section before the next meeting.
My plan is to help you with that. I'm going to provide an update, and we had discussed this previously. Instead of giving you the whole big spreadsheet that we normally do when we do our quarterly or biannual updates, I'm just going to take the building section and I'm going to break it down year by year for each action item into a more comprehensible document that will be included in the agenda packet so that we'll have some background information to go through.
Great. All righty. Well, seeing no members of the public, we'll skip over the public comment. So recap, we'll confirm next meeting time and location is here, April 7th, 2025, 4 to 5:30 p.m. Actionable items for commission and staff. Sounds like the report for buildings.
Yes, I'll generate a report on actions to date related to buildings, and we will coordinate with Jane on tours of the compost and landfill facility. I think what might work best is to try to get a schedule of upcoming tours from Jane and share them out with you that you might join in on. If we schedule one specifically for all the members, just based on the hands that went up at interest, we might run into some quorum issues, which might require us to post it as a public meeting. So rather than do that, we might spread you out among some established ones, and you can pick one that fits with your time of day and schedule. Would that work for you, Jane? We'll figure it out. All right.
Great. Motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second by Trier. Okay, all in favor?
Thanks for the excellent discussion, everyone.